The morning sun rose slowly over the quiet Oregon town, spilling golden light across Margaret's small kitchen. She had lived alone for nearly a decade, ever since her husband passed. And though the silence sometimes weighed on her, she had learned to fill her days with small routines. She baked, tended to her garden, and spent long hours reading by the window. There was peace in her solitude, even if it carried a trace of loneliness. That morning she was arranging a vase of wildflowers when a sudden knock on the door startled her. When she opened it, she saw Ethan, her grandson, standing there, rain on his jacket and a sheepish grin on his face. He looked older than she remembered, more sure of himself. Yet there was still that softness in his eyes. "Hey, Grandma," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside, smiling as he entered, his presence instantly filling the quiet house with energy. It had been months since she last saw him. He'd been busy finishing college in Portland, studying business, and working part-time. Life was pulling him forward fast, and Margaret understood that's what youth was for. But today, something in his tone told her this wasn't just a casual visit. He held a wrinkled white shirt in his hands and laughed nervously. "I have a job interview tomorrow," he said. "And I kind of forgot how to iron." Margaret chuckled softly. "So you've come all this way because of a shirt?" "Not just that," he replied quickly, "but maybe a little." His grin was boyish, disarming. She took the shirt from him, feeling the cool fabric between her fingers. "I'll take care of it," she said, leading him into the kitchen. "Sit down. Tell me everything." As she heated the iron, the sound of steam filled the small space. Ethan began to talk about his studies, the company he hoped to work for, his nerves about the interview. He spoke fast, hands moving as he talked, like he was trying to release all the pressure he'd been holding inside. Margaret listened carefully, her heart swelling with pride. She had raised his father to be hardworking and kind, and she saw the same spirit in Ethan. But she also sensed something else, a quiet doubt, a hesitation in his voice when he spoke about the future. "You'll do fine," she told him gently. "You always do." He leaned back in his chair, smiling at her in a way that made her chest tighten. "You always say that," he said. "Because it's true," she replied, glancing up from the shirt. "You've got your father's drive and your mother's heart. That's a rare mix." Her words seemed to touch him deeply. He looked down, nodding slowly. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The house felt alive again, filled with the warmth of family and the quiet hum of love that needed no words. After lunch, they sat together on the porch. The air smelled of pine and the coming rain. Ethan told her about his late-night doubts, his fear of not being good enough. Margaret listened, feeling an ache of recognition. She remembered being that age, uncertain, full of questions, trying to make her way in a world that felt too big. "You know," she said softly, "I felt the same when I was young. Every step forward felt like walking into fog. But somehow, things always became clear when I stopped trying to see everything at once." Ethan nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "How did you know what to do back then?" "I didn't," she said with a gentle laugh. "I just kept moving. Life has a funny way of showing us where we're meant to be, usually after we've made a few wrong turns." They both smiled. For Margaret, it was strange seeing her grandson not as the little boy who ran through her garden, but as a man trying to find his place in the world. There was something beautiful about it and a little bittersweet dot when evening came. She ironed the last crease from his shirt and handed it to him. "There," she said proudly, "you'll look sharp enough to charm them all." Ethan laughed and held the shirt up. "You're still the best, Grandma. I don't know what I'd do without you." His words caught her off guard. There was a sincerity in his tone that went beyond gratitude, something deeper. Something that touched a place in her heart she didn't often let herself feel. She brushed it off with a smile, but when she looked at him again, he was watching her closely, a quiet tenderness in his expression. It wasn't strange or uncomfortable, just pure human connection. Like two souls understanding each other completely. Margaret turned away first, pretending to busy herself with the teapot. "You'll stay the night," she said. "It's getting late." He hesitated, then nodded. "If you don't mind?" "Course not," she said, smiling. "I'll make up the guest room." That night after dinner, they sat by the fire. The old clock ticked softly, the only sound in the room. Margaret asked about his dreams, where he wanted to live, what kind of life he imagined. He spoke openly, sharing hopes of building something meaningful, not just chasing money or status. His honesty surprised her. He had grown wiser than she realized. At one point, he looked at her and said quietly, "You know, Grandma, I think you've always been the person I admire most." The words hung in the air. Margaret's throat tightened, emotion welling in her chest. "That's very kind," she whispered, "but I've just done what anyone would." "Not everyone," he said softly. "You've been through so much, and you still smile like this. I hope I can be like you someday." She didn't know what to say. It wasn't the kind of compliment you expected from a young man to his grandmother, not out of duty, but out of deep respect and affection. It filled the room with warmth, like the glow of the fireplace had found its way into her heart. When Ethan finally went to bed, Margaret stayed up for a while, watching the flames flicker. The house felt different now, not lonely, but alive. She thought about his eyes, that look of understanding she'd seen when he spoke to her. It was the kind of look you rarely get in life, one that said, "I see you. I understand who you are." As she turned off the lights, she realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes love doesn't always mean romance or passion. Sometimes it's found in shared silence, in helping someone find their courage. In a small moment that feels larger than life. That night, as rain began to fall softly outside, Margaret smiled to herself. It had all started with a simple favor, an iron shirt. A knock on the door, but something about the day had touched her deeply. She didn't yet know what it meant or how it would stay with her. But she knew this much. When morning came, she would remember that look in Ethan's eyes, the one that made her feel, for the first time in a long while, truly seen. And in that quiet, glowing thought, she drifted to sleep, peaceful, grateful, and unaware that this visit was only the beginning of something that, would change them both forever. Morning light spilled through the thin curtains, painting the living room in soft gold. Margaret woke early as usual, her mind still lingering on the warmth of last night's conversation. The rain had stopped, leaving the world quiet and fresh. She moved about the kitchen, humming softly, making coffee and pancakes, Ethan's favorite since he was little. The smell soon drifted through the house, and she heard the creak of floorboards upstairs. Ethan appeared a few minutes later. Hair messy, shirt wrinkled again, and eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning, Grandma," he said, rubbing his neck and smiling. "Good morning," she replied warmly. "Sit down. Breakfast's ready." He dropped into the chair, looking both grateful and tired. "I didn't sleep much," he admitted after a while. "Too nervous about the interview, I guess." "You'll do fine," she said reassuringly. "You always do." He smiled faintly, but didn't respond right away. There was something on his mind, she could tell. His eyes lingered on her longer than usual, like he was trying to find the right words but kept stopping himself. They ate in a comfortable silence. The kitchen clock ticked steadily. Outside, the air was cool and filled with the sound of birds. Then, out of nowhere, Ethan spoke, his voice low but clear. "Grandma," he said softly, "can I tell you something without you thinking I'm being silly?" Margaret looked up, sensing this seriousness in his tone. "Of course," she said gently. "You can tell me anything." He took a deep breath and looked at his hands. "It's just, I've been feeling lost lately. Like I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. Everyone expects me to have it figured out, my dad, my friends, but I don't." Margaret felt her heart twist. She had seen glimpses of that struggle before, but hearing him admit it made her ache. "It's okay to feel that way," she said. "Life isn't supposed to be clear all the time. You just have to keep walking through the fog until you find your way." Ethan nodded slowly, but his eyes stayed fixed on her face. "That's the thing," he said softly. "When I'm here with you, it feels like the fog clears a little. I don't know why. Maybe because you make everything seem simple." Her lips curved into a tender smile. "That's because I've had time to realize what really matters. You'll get there too." but the look he gave her in return made her pause. It was steady, intense, not romantic, but full of deep admiration and warmth. It made her heart flutter unexpectedly. And for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She busied herself with clearing the table, breaking the silence. "You should get ready soon," she said softly. "You don't want to be late." He nodded, stood, and stepped closer to her. "Thanks, Grandma," he said quietly. "Not just for the shirt and breakfast, but for listening. I don't talk like this with anyone else." She turned to look at him and smiled faintly. "That's what I'm here for," she whispered. After he left for his interview, the house fell quiet again. Margaret stood by the window, watching the car disappear down the road. She tried to brush off the strange heaviness in her chest, but it lingered. It wasn't sadness, more like a realization that Ethan wasn't just her little grandson anymore. He was becoming someone with his own worries, emotions, and depth, and she felt honored, even humbled, that he trusted her enough to share them. The day passed slowly. Margaret cleaned, read, and baked. But her thoughts kept circling back to Ethan's words. "When I'm here with you, it feels like the fog clears." She couldn't forget that. It was such a simple thing to say, yet it echoed in her heart with quiet power. Evening arrived, and the sound of a car pulling into the driveway made her turn. Ethan stepped out, still in his interview clothes, looking both exhausted and relieved. She met him at the door, anxious to know how it went. "It went great," he said with a wide smile. "Better than I expected. It's wonderful." She exclaimed, "I knew you'd do well." He laughed lightly, stepping inside. "You were right. Maybe your confidence rubbed off on me." They sat together on the couch as he recounted every detail, the questions, the nervous start, and the moment it all clicked. Margaret listened, laughing and smiling in all the right places. But beneath it all, there was a deeper joy watching him grow. Finding his footing and knowing she had been part of that journey. As night fell, they found themselves sitting again by the fireplace. The flickering light painted soft shadows across the room. Ethan leaned back, looking comfortable for the first time in days. "You know," he said, voice calm and thoughtful, "I think this house feels more like home than anywhere else. Maybe it's because it reminds me of when things were simple." Margaret's smile faded a little, not from sadness, but from the memory his words stirred. "You always loved coming here," she said softly. "You used to spend summers running through the yard, chasing butterflies, pretending you were a pirate." He laughed. "Yeah, I remember that. You'd make lemonade and sit outside watching me. I thought you were invincible back then." She chuckled quietly. "Invincible? Hardly. I was just young and stubborn." He looked at her closely, his eyes soft but serious. "You still are." The words caught her off guard. She wasn't used to hearing compliments like that anymore. "Oh, stop," she said, trying to hide her smile. But he didn't stop looking at her. There was something in his gaze, respect, admiration, maybe even something deeper that neither of them could name. It wasn't inappropriate, just deeply human. Two souls who shared love, history, and trust, and who saw each other not just as family, but as people. The fire cracked softly, filling the silence between them. Margaret felt something shift, a quiet realization that this connection, this understanding, was something rare. It wasn't about youth or age. It was about hearts recognizing one another across generations. After a while, Sis stood and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You've had a long day. Get some rest," she said. He looked up at her and nodded. "Good night, Grandma," he said warmly. "And thank you for everything." She smiled, though her heart was full of emotions she couldn't name. "Good night, Ethan." When she went to bed that night, she lay awake for a long time, thinking about how life was made of these fleeting, beautiful moments, small things that felt ordinary but carried meaning far beyond words. She thought of Ethan's smile, his words, the way he looked at her not as someone fragile or old, but as someone strong and real, and though she didn't say it out loud, she whispered a quiet thought into the dark. Sometimes love isn't about romance, it's about being seen, remembered and cherished. As sleep finally claimed her, Margaret felt peaceful. She didn't yet know how much that single visit would stay with her, or how deeply it would shape both their hearts in the days to come. But for now, that night was enough. The warmth, the honesty, the quiet bond, it all lingered, glowing softly like the embers in the fireplace that refused to fade. The next day brought a quiet calm to the house. The storm had passed and sunlight filtered through the windows, making everything look softer, almost golden. Margaret moved around the kitchen humming, her heart lightened by how well Ethan's interview had gone. She felt proud of him, proud of herself for raising a son who'd raised such a fine young man. Yet beneath that warmth, a faint restlessness stirred. Something in the air had shifted between them the night before, something unspoken but felt. When Ethan came downstairs, he was already dressed to go out. "I thought I'd grab some groceries," he said, grabbing his keys. "You've done enough cooking for both of us." Margaret smiled. "You're sweet, but you don't need to. Want to," he said simply. "Besides, it's the least I can do after everything you've done." She didn't argue. She watched him leave, realizing how grown up he'd become, kind, thoughtful, dependable. The little boy who used to run around with scraped knees and endless questions was now a man with quiet confidence and a heart full of sincerity. A few hours later, Ethan returned with bags of groceries and flowers, a soft blush of lilies that made the kitchen smell like spring. "For you," he said, handing them to her. "You deserve something pretty." Margaret's heart melted. "Ethan, you didn't have to. I wanted to," he said with a grin. "You've made this place feel like home again." That afternoon, they cooked together something they hadn't done in years. He chopped vegetables clumsily while she stirred the pot, laughing whenever he dropped something. The laughter filled the kitchen like music, and for a while, they forgot about everything else. When dinner was ready, they set the table, lit a candle, and sat down together. The meal was simple pasta salad and a glass of wine each, but somehow it felt special. Maybe it was the quiet connection between them, or the way Ethan kept looking at her like she was someone important, someone he respected deeply. After dinner, they stayed at the table talking. The topics drifted easily from his job hopes to her memories of raising his father, from old family stories to dreams that still lingered in their hearts. It was one of those conversations that seemed to stretch beyond time at one point. Margaret said softly, "You know, when you're young, you think life is endless. You keep waiting for the perfect moment. Then one day, you realize it's the small, ordinary moments that mean the most." Ethan nodded slowly. "Like this one," he said. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, silence filled the space between them. Not awkward, just full of understanding emotion, and something that words couldn't capture. Later, they moved to the living room. The fire was burning again, and the air was cool from the evening breeze. Ethan picked up his guitar, an old one he'd brought along, and started strumming softly. "Remember this?" he asked. "You used to sing along when I was little." Margaret laughed, surprised. "Oh, it's been years." "Come on," he said playfully. "You have to." At first, she refused, but soon her voice joined his, soft and shaky at first, then stronger. They sang an old folk tune, their voices blending gently, echoing off the walls. When the song ended, Ethan looked at her, smiling. "You still have the most calming voice," he said. Margaret felt her cheeks warm. "You always knew how to flatter," she teased lightly, though her heart fluttered at the genuine kindness in his tone. He shook his head. "No, really. You make people feel safe. That's rare." She didn't know how to answer, so she just smiled. But his words lingered. For years, she had been the strong one, the caretaker, the listener. Yet in that moment, she realized how deeply it touched her to be seen. Not just as grandma, but as a person who mattered. The evening stretched on. They talked about life again, about choices, and about how people sometimes drift away from who they used to be. Ethan admitted, "I think I lost myself a bit. I keep chasing things, money, success, but none of it feels right." Margaret looked at him tenderly. "You're not lost," she said. "You're learning. That's what growing up really is." He nodded, his eyes soft. "You always make things sound so simple." Maybe because I've already been where you are, she said gently, and I've learned that peace doesn't come from what you have. It comes from knowing you're loved. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled, casting a golden glow across the room. Then Ethan said quietly, "That's what I feel here with you." The words caught her breath. She felt an ache in her chest, not of confusion, but of emotion, the deep kind that came from love, gratitude, and connection all at once. She reached out, resting her hand on his. "That means more to me than you know," she said softly. They stayed like that for a moment, two generations connected by more than blood. It wasn't about romance or youth. It was about hearts finding comfort in each other's presence. When the clock struck 10, Margaret stood. "You should rest," she said. "You've had a long day." Ethan looked reluctant to move. "I could stay up a bit longer," he said. "You'll need your energy for tomorrow," she replied with a smile. "You've got the second interview, remember?" He sighed but nodded. "You're right. You always are." As he stood, he hesitated, then leaned forward and hugged her, long, tight, and sincere. "Good night, Grandma," he said softly. "I don't say it enough, but I'm really glad I came." She hugged him back, her heart swelling. "Good night, Ethan," she whispered. "I'm glad you did too." After he went upstairs, Margaret sat by the fire again. The room was quiet now, but her thoughts weren't. She kept thinking of his words, his tone, the way he looked at her, not with pity or distance, but with warmth. She hadn't felt so deeply connected to someone in years. It wasn't about anything inappropriate. It was about feeling alive again, feeling valued, needed, and understood. That night, she realized something powerful. Love changes form over time, but it never disappears. Sometimes it comes through family, through kindness, through a shared song in the quiet glow of a fire. When she finally went to bed, she looked out the window. The moonlight spilled over the trees, calm and gentle. She thought about how fleeting life was, how easily people forgot to say the things that mattered, and she made a silent promise to cherish every moment. Every conversation, every simple act of love. Because maybe, she thought, these weren't just memories. Maybe they were the reason she'd been given this time with Ethan to remind her heart what connection truly meant. As she turned off the lamp, a faint smile touched her lips. Tomorrow would bring more words, more laughter, maybe even more surprises. But tonight, she let herself feel grateful for the warmth of family, for the peace of being seen, and for the quiet kind of love that asks for nothing in return but stays forever in the heart. Morning sunlight spilled softly across the guest room floor, warming the curtains and the quiet hum of the house. Margaret woke to the faint sound of the coffee maker downstairs. Ethan was already up. She smiled, pulling her robe tighter before stepping into the hallway. There was something peaceful about that morning, as if the house itself was exhaling after days of storm, worry, and reflection. When she reached the kitchen, Ethan was standing by the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He looked up and grinned, his boyish charm shining through the calm of the morning. "Good morning," he said. "I made yours just the way you like it." Margaret laughed softly. "How do you even remember that?" He handed her the mug. "You haven't changed it in 10 years, he teased. She took a sip, the warmth spreading through her. "You always notice the small things." "I learned from the best," he said with a smile. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table that had hosted so many family dinners, birthdays, and heart-to-heart talks over the years. But today it felt different, quieter, more meaningful. Outside, the yard shimmered with dew, and the air carried the smell of wet earth. So, Margaret began, "Are you nervous about today?" "A little," Ethan admitted. "But after last night, I feel ready, like I can handle whatever happens." She nodded. "You can. You've always had what it takes." He looked at her, serious now. "You really believe that?" "Of course I do," she said, her voice steady but warm. "You're kind, determined, and honest. The world needs more people like you." Ethan's eyes softened. "You've always been my biggest supporter, Grandma. I don't think I've ever told you how much that means to me." Margaret smiled, touched. "You just did." There was a pause. the kind that wasn't uncomfortable, just full of things neither needed to say aloud. Then Ethan reached into his bag and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped box. He slid it across the table toward her. "I was going to wait until after the interview, but I want you to have this now." Margaret frowned slightly, curious. "What is it?" "Just open it," he said, leaning back with a grin. She peeled the paper carefully, as if unwrapping something fragile. Inside was a small wooden frame. When she turned it over, her breath caught. It was a photo one taken years ago of her holding a much younger Ethan in her arms. Both of them laughing in the backyard under the summer sun. The photo was old, slightly faded, but the joy in it felt timeless. Underneath the photo, engraved into the frame, were the words, "You gave me everything, even when I didn't know how to ask." Margaret blinked back tears. "Oh, Ethan." He smiled softly. "You always believed in me. I wanted to give you something that shows how much that matters." She looked at the photo again, her heart swelling. It wasn't just a gift, it was a reminder. A reminder of all the small moments that had built their bond. The scraped knees she'd patched up, the meals they'd shared, the long talks at the kitchen table that had shaped both their lives. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You don't know how much this means to me," she whispered. He met her eyes, sincerity shining in his. "I think I do." The words lingered in the air, gentle, heartfelt, unspoken with anything but love. After breakfast, Ethan left for his interview, and the house felt unusually quiet again. Margaret busied herself with small chores, but her mind kept wandering back to that photo. She placed it on the mantel where the morning light touched it. I smiled every time she passed by. Hours later, she heard the sound of the front door. Ethan walked in, his expression unreadable at first. Her heart skipped. "Well?" she asked, trying to sound calm. Then he broke into a grin. "I got it." Margaret gasped and hurried toward him, wrapping him in a tight hug. "Oh, Ethan, I knew you would." He laughed, spinning her slightly. The joy between them, infectious. "They said I start next week. Grandma, I can't believe it." She stepped back, tears of pride filling her eyes. "You deserve this. You've worked so hard." It's for the rest of the afternoon. They celebrated in their own quiet way, baking cookies, listening to music, talking about what was ahead. The house, once silent, now buzzed with life and laughter. As evening approached, they sat outside on the porch, the sun dipping low behind the trees. The air was cool and the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. Margaret looked at him, her heart full. "I'm so proud of you," she said softly. "Your parents would be too." Ethan's voice was gentle. "I couldn't have done it without you. You were always there, no matter what. You gave me stability when everything else felt uncertain." She smiled wistfully. "That's what family's for." He looked at her then, his gaze deep with emotion. "You've done more than that, Grandma. You've shown me what love really means. Not just saying it, but living it." For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she said quietly, "You know, sometimes we don't realize the impact we have on others until they tell us. Thank you for telling me." Ethan took a deep breath. "Promise me something," he said. "Promise you'll start doing more for yourself now. Take that art class you always talk about. Visit that lake you love." Margaret chuckled. "You sound like your grandfather." "Serious," he said. "You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. It's time you let life take care of you for a change." His words touched her deeply, because they weren't just kind, they were true. She had spent so much of her life putting others first that she had forgotten what it felt like to dream for herself. That night, long after Ethan had gone to bed, Margaret sat by the window with a cup of tea. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt lonely. The framed photo glowed softly under the lamplight, and she smiled. She thought of everything that had happened: the burst pipes, the unexpected visit, the laughter, the quiet talks, and the gift that now sat on her mantel. It all felt like a gentle reminder from life itself. Love never grows old, and even the smallest gestures can fill the heart in ways words never could. The next morning, when Ethan packed his bags to leave, Margaret walked him to the door. "You'll visit soon?" she asked. "As soon as I can," he said with a grin. "And this time, I'm taking you out for dinner. My treat. I'll hold you to that," she said, smiling. He hugged her one last time before heading out, his car disappearing down the quiet country road. As she stood in the doorway, the sun warming her face, she whispered softly, "Thank you, Ethan." Later that day, as she dusted the living room, she glanced again at the framed photo and read the engraved words. They no longer made her tear up. They made her feel peaceful, because in that moment, she understood something simple but profound. Life's greatest gifts aren't wrapped in boxes or tied with ribbons. They're found in the people we love, in the moments we share, and in the words that remind us who we are. Margaret sat down by the window once more, the golden afternoon spilling across her hands. She didn't need anything grand or dramatic. She had everything she needed: love, memory, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had given her heart where it mattered most. And that, she thought with a soft smile, was the real gift, one that would stay with her forever.